The memory always starts with the smell. Not the rot of the East, which I suppose I should recall first given how it ended, but the hot, metallic tang of the Krupp works in Essen. Grease and ozone. The scent of industry. That was a good smell. It meant things were working. I can close my eyes now, 80 years later, and still feel the floor vibrating through the soles of my boots. It was a rhythmic shudder, a heartbeat of steel. The hydraulic presses didn't scream. They hummed, a low baritone thrum that promised consistency. You put a sheet of metal in, the die came down, and the metal took a shape. It was logic. It was geometry. Cause and effect. If you followed the rules, the machine didn't hurt you. If you respected the tolerances, the structure held. I was a factory worker, not a warrior. I understood the load-bearing capacity of a rivet. I understood that if a beam was straight, it was strong. But memory is a liar. I tell you it was 1942, but sometimes the winters bleed together in my head until they are just one long, white scar. We were dug into the steppe west of the city. They called it a dugout, but it was a grave we hadn't died in yet. The symmetry of Essen was gone. Here there were no straight lines. The Russian earth was chaotic, frozen into jagged waves where the treads of the panzers had churned the mud before the temperature dropped. I was sitting in the corner of the hole, my knees pulled to my chest. My name is Klaus Richter, and I was 22 years old, though my hands looked like they belonged to a man of 50. The cold in Russia isn't like the cold in the Ruhr. In Essen, cold is something that happens to the air. In Stalingrad, the cold was a physical weight. It pressed against your eyes. It sought out the gaps in your tunic like water seeking a drain. We were pioneer, sappers, builders, and destroyers. We were supposed to be the ones who understood structure. But looking at the horizon, I understood nothing. A rat moved. I didn't see it, but I heard the scratch of claws on timber. It was above me, navigating the logs we had lashed together to form the roof of our burrow. A fine mist of dirt drifted down, landing on my cheek. I flinched. It was a violent, involuntary spasm that made the man next to me, a boy from Munich named Weber, look up from his letter. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with the adrenaline of battle, but with a suffocating, primitive dread. It wasn't the Russians I feared in that moment. It was the earth, the soil. I stared at the timber support beam next to my head. It was bowing slightly, just a fraction of an inch. I knew the weight of the frozen steppe above us. Tons of it. If that rat dislodged a pebble, if a shell landed 100 meters away and sent a shockwave through the ground, the physics would assert themselves. The beam would snap. The earth would reclaim the air in my lungs. "Easy, Klaus," Weber whispered, his voice cracking. He thought I was shell-shocked. He didn't know I was calculating the sheer strength of pine logs against the density of permafrost. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the wood. It was damp, rotting. "It's not deep enough," I murmured. "What in the supports? They aren't set deep enough. The frost heave is pushing them in." Weber shook his head and went back to his letter. He didn't understand. He was an idealist. He believed in the crusade, in the speeches about destiny and living space. I believed in gravity, and gravity was winning. I tried to summon the factory floor again. I tried to visualize the clean lines of the assembly belt, but the silence of the steppe was too loud. It was a heavy, predatory silence. In the factory, silence meant a breakdown. Here, silence meant the enemy was listening. Then the whistle blew. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Hank, kicked the canvas flap of our dugout aside. The light that flooded in was gray and harsh, blinding us after the gloom of the hole. "Rouse, get up. 297th on your feet." I grabbed my rifle, but my other hand went instinctively to the heavy canvas bag at my hip, my wire cutters, my crimpers, the tools of my trade. We spilled out of the earth like insects disturbed by a plow. The horizon was burning. That is the image that stays. Not the faces of my friends, which have faded into a blur of gray wool and pale skin, but the skyline of Stalingrad. It was a jagged tear in the sky, black smoke churning against the white clouds. The city was a furnace, and we were the coal. "We're moving in," Hank shouted over the wind. He pointed toward the industrial district, a skeletal forest of smokestacks and shattered warehouses. "Sector red, house to house. The infantry needs paths cleared." "Move," I looked at the city. It was a labyrinth of broken stone. 1,000,000 tons of concrete suspended in a precarious act of falling. My stomach twisted. Out here, on the steppe, I felt exposed. But in there, the sky was made of stone, and it was waiting to fall on us. I tightened the strap of my helmet, feeling the leather bite into my chin. I wasn't marching toward glory. I was marching into a tomb that hadn't been sealed yet. The transition wasn't gradual. One moment we were in the open, boots crunching on frozen grass, and the next we were swallowed by the anatomy of destruction. They call it urban warfare, but that implies a system. This was geology. The artillery had turned the suburbs into a canyon system of rubble. We entered the industrial sector through the remains of a rail yard. The twisted tracks curled up from the ground like dead vines. My unit, the squad of the 297th Pioneer Battalion, moved in a single file. We hugged the walls, or what was left of them. The noise changed first. On the steppe, the wind howled. Here, the wind moaned. It whistled through the empty windows and rushed down the elevator shafts of gutted apartment blocks. The acoustics were treacherous. A rifle shot fired 3 streets away sounded like it was right beside your ear, snapping against the brickwork. "Richter up front," the sergeant ordered. "Watch for wires." I moved to the point position. This was my job. I was the eyes. I had to stop thinking about the weight of the buildings and start thinking about how they were put together. I had to become the factory worker again. We approached a 3-story tenement building. It was a husk. The front facade had been sheared off, revealing the rooms inside like a dollhouse cut in half. Wallpaper flapped in the freezing breeze, blue flowers in a bedroom, yellow stripes in a kitchen. A bathtub hung precariously from a pipe on the 2nd floor, swinging slightly. "Clear a path," the sergeant whispered. I stepped onto the threshold. The floor was covered in a carpet of pulverized brick and glass. It crunched under my boots, a sound that felt deafeningly loud. I stopped. I breathed in. The air tasted of plaster dust, cordite and something sweet, rotting potatoes, maybe, or old blood. I looked at the debris field. To the untrained eye, it was just trash. But I looked for the anomaly, the disruption in the pattern. A chair lay on its side in the hallway. Natural enough, but the dust around its legs was disturbed in a way that didn't match the blast pattern. The drag marks were too straight. I raised a fist. The squad froze behind me. I crouched, my knees popping. I lowered my cheek to the floor, squinting against the gloom. There, a glint of copper wire, thinner than a hair, running from the leg of the chair to a floorboard that sat 2 millimeters higher than its neighbor. Russian engineering. Crude, but effective. A tension release trigger. If you moved the chair, you pulled the pin. If you stepped on the board, you completed the circuit. Mine, I whispered. I pulled my wire cutters from my belt. The metal was freezing against my skin. My breath plumed in front of me, obscuring my vision. I had to time my cuts between heartbeats. I crawled forward, the broken glass biting into my knees through the fabric of my trousers. I traced the wire. It led into the wall, likely to a daisy chain of explosives rigged to bring the ceiling down. They didn't just want to kill us. They wanted to bury us. My throat tightened. The ceiling above me was sagging, held up by cracked plaster and hope. I isolated the tension line. I placed the jaws of the cutter around the copper. I applied pressure. Not a snap, never a snap. A slow squeeze. The metal parted. The wire went slack. I exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "Clear," I said, my voice sounding strange in the confined space. The sergeant nodded, a brief flicker of approval in his hard eyes. "Good eyes, Richter. Move up." We moved into the stairwell. I felt a surge of pride, a ghost of the satisfaction I used to feel when a machine part fit perfectly. I had imposed order on the chaos. I had solved the puzzle. We reached the first landing. The point man, a corporal named Hans, took the lead to check the upper corridor. I stayed back, coiling the cut wire, thinking about the physics of the trigger mechanism. Room clear, Hans called out from the floor above. He took a step. It wasn't a click. It was a thud, followed instantly by a sound like a thunderclap trapped inside a box. The ceiling above me buckled. Dust blasted down the stairwell, blinding me. Hans, someone screamed. There was no answer, just the wet sound of debris settling. I stood there frozen, the wire cutters useless in my hand. I had found the trap on the floor. I hadn't looked up. The Russians had rigged the floorboards on the second level to a shaped charge in the wall. Hans hadn't made a mistake. He had just run out of luck. The rules kept changing. In the factory, if you did it right, you were safe. Here you could be perfect and still die. Medic, the sergeant roared. Defensive positions. They know we're here. I scrambled into a room on the ground floor, my heart trying to batter its way out of my chest. I pressed my back against a load-bearing wall, or what I hoped was one. The illusion of my skill evaporated. I wasn't an engineer. I was a rat in a maze that was on fire. Then the ground jumped. It started as a low rumble, deep in the bedrock, vibrating up through my boots, just like the presses in Essen. But this wasn't rhythmic. It was the chaotic drumming of a creeping barrage. Artillery, the first shell hit the street outside, blowing out the remaining windows. Shards of glass flew across the room like diamond shrapnel. I curled into a ball, covering my head with my arms. The noise was absolute. It erased thought. It erased time. Then a shell hit the roof. The building didn't collapse all at once. It groaned first, a terrible, tearing sound of steel giving way. The air pressure in the room spiked, popping my ears. I looked up through the dust, my eyes stinging, and saw the ceiling crack open. A spiderweb of fractures raced across the plaster. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just watched the geometry fail. The heavy oak beams, which had held this roof for 50 years, snapped like matchsticks. The world above me detached itself and began to descend. Darkness rushed in to meet me. The last thing I heard was the sound of the earth exhaling, ready to swallow me whole. Silence first, then the ringing in my ears. A high, thin wire of sound that wouldn't snap. I couldn't move my legs. The panic flared instantly, a white-hot spike in my chest. I thought they were severed. I concentrated, wiggling my toes inside the leather boots. Pain, sharp, biting pain. Good. Pain meant the nerves were still connected. I tried to inhale. The air was solid. It tasted of pulverized lime, ancient mortar, and the copper tang of blood. I coughed and the noise was muffled, swallowed instantly by the thousands of tons of debris packed around us. Sergeant, a groan answered me from the left. I fumbled for my belt. My fingers felt thick, clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. I found the lamp. I forced the switch over. Nothing. I hit the casing against my palm. The filament buzzed. A weak, yellow beam cut through the soup. It hit a wall of brick not 6 inches from my face. Panic is a cold fluid. It starts in the stomach and fills the lungs. I was back in the factory in Essen, under the massive stamping press. But the safety catch had failed. The weight of the Urals was on my back. The urge to thrash, to scream, to claw at the stone until my fingers bled was overwhelming. Richter. The voice was weak. It was Muller. Richter. The ceiling. I froze. I slowly angled the light upward. A concrete slab, massive and gray, was balanced on a single splintered rafter. It hung there, a guillotine blade, waiting for a reason to fall. If I moved the wrong stone, we were paced. I closed my eyes. I forced the terrified factory worker down into the dark. He was useless here. He would kill us. This situation did not need a worker. It needed a sapper. I opened my eyes and looked at the pile again. It wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a structural equation. Unbalanced forces, variable loads, tension and compression. Stay still, I whispered. The dust coated my tongue. Everyone stay absolutely still. I saw a gap near the floor, a void created by a fallen I-beam. I crawled. My shoulders scraped the rough stone. The air was getting hot, thick with carbon dioxide. We were running out of time. I found a piece of twisted rebar jutting from a column. I snapped it off and used it like a feeler gauge. I probed the darkness. Solid, hollow, shiftable. I moved a brick. Dust poured onto my neck. I slid a piece of splintered wood into the gap to catch the weight. Inch by inch, I was building a tunnel through a collapse, shoring up the mountain with matchsticks. I could hear Muller breathing behind me. Shallow, fast, keep moving, I said. My voice sounded like grinding stones. I was deep inside the throat of the building now. The weight above me was immense. I could feel it pressing on the back of my skull, a physical pressure that wanted to squeeze my eyes out. Stub, the pile groaned. A deep, tectonic shift that vibrated through my chest. The slab above me slipped. The screech of rock grinding on rock tore through the silence. My lamp flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. Absolute, suffocating black. I held my breath. The dust settled on my open eyes. I was the coal in the furnace, waiting to be burned. My thumb found the switch in the dark. I didn't toggle it. I just pressed the casing, praying to a god I hadn't believed in since the first winter. The filament flared. A weak orange glow returned, illuminating the dust motes dancing in front of my face. The slab had settled, but it hadn't crushed me. It had opened a fissure. A draft, cold, biting Russian air hit my sweaty face. I pushed the rebar through the new gap. It met no resistance. I shoved the loose bricks aside, ignoring the tearing of my uniform and skin. I pulled myself through the hole and fell onto a concrete floor. I rolled over, gasping. The air tasted of frost and cordite, but it was oxygen. It was life. Come through. I croaked. I pulled Muller out. Then the sergeant. We looked at each other in the gray dawn of the basement. We were coated in white dust, statues brought to life, our eyes wide and rimmed with red, staring out of masks of plaster. We didn't speak. There are no words for returning from the dead. We just walked back to our lines, leaving the ruin behind. That was a lifetime ago. I sit in my chair now. It is a good chair. Sturdy, German oak. The upholstery is clean. The window is open. It is winter in Essen, and the wind is bitter. But I cannot close it. I need to know the air can get in. I need to know there is a way out. People talk about the war like it was a grand chess game. They talk of ideologies, of maps, of great strategies and national destiny. It wasn't. It was just rocks. It was just gravity and fear. The factories in Essen are gone or changed. The machines I tended as a boy are scrap metal now. The fatherland we fought for was a lie built on a foundation of sand. A machine designed to grind us all into dust. But the lesson remains. You cannot hold up the sky. If the roof falls, you cannot stop it with your hands. Panic kills. Ideology kills. Glory is a myth told to dead men. The only thing that saves you is looking at the mess in front of you and finding the one piece you can move. The one brick that won't bring the rest down. You move it. Then you find the next. I look at my hands. They are spotted with age, shaking slightly, but they remember the weight of the stone. They remember the texture of the rebar. The machine is broken forever. The harvest is ruined, but I am still here. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.